Do you ever get the feeling you're being watched? An eerie sense that the deck is stacked against you by someone or something hovering in the corner of your eye? You're not alone. According to a recent Gallup poll, 7 out of 10 Americans oppose the construction of data centers in their backyard to power AI. But despite this incredible statistic, opposing ChatGPT and sprawling server farms could be the reason you show up on a federal watch list, according to documents I obtained and published with Wired. This is America's new surveillance regime. With the help of insider voices, we'll paint a picture of the deep state embarking on a vast new conspiracy. This time, the government's fight isn't with foreign adversaries like Iran, China, or Russia. It's here on American soil, and its alleged enemies are everyday Americans working everyday American jobs. The goal isn't protecting national security, but the profits and feelings of corporate America.
This is telling the Justice Department, the FBI, the DEA, the Secret Service, all these agencies, hey guys, we have to focus on this.
The price of gas, food, childcare, everything is going up. And to see something that characterizes class-based or economic grievances as an indicator of terrorism or a dangerous belief is really shocking.
My name is Daniel Boguslaw, and I'm an investigative reporter covering national security and U.S. intelligence agencies. Stick with me over the next few minutes. We'll not only outline this new conspiracy, but for the first time, we'll reveal one government agency that is taking on an unprecedented role in the war against workers. Lists are being drawn up, new categories of dissent are being formulated, and the citizens being targeted are just like you. Let's take a look at what your government doesn't want you to know. The clearest signpost of a new mass surveillance and intimidation campaign taking place across the country is an unassuming 5-character acronym, NSPM-7, short for National Security Presidential Memorandum 7.
Can we assume that you or persons under your direction at the Department of Justice have prepared that list of groups or entities who are designated as domestic terrorist organizations? And I just remind you, that's a yes or no question. Did you prepare the list?
I'm not going to answer it yes or no.
This was the U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi refusing to answer a member of Congress's question about the formulation of secret lists of subversives under NSPM 7. And her efforts to obscure the narrative around this program go even deeper. My former colleague, independent journalist Ken Klippenstein, began investigating the investigators and obtaining confidential documents. In response, Klippenstein had several visits from Bondi's direct reports at the FBI. So I booked a trip to Madison, Wisconsin to talk to him about it.
At this point, I've had 2 visits for stories that I've done from different FBI agents. One was from a field office in Middleton, which is like 15 or 20 minutes from where I live here in Madison, Wisconsin.
I asked Ken to take me back to the start of this conspiracy. 7 months ago on September 25th, 2025, when President Trump signed an executive order that unleashed drastic impacts and very little media scrutiny.
It's really a significant order because when it was first handed down, I think there was a lot of confusion about what it was. There were questions about, oh, this is just rhetoric. Trump says a lot of things, which he does say a lot of things that there's, you know, it's just Trump saying crazy things. But this was absolutely something that has been interpreted by the federal government as something that we're going to operationalize.
But where did NSPM 7 and the FBI's visit to Ken come from?
NSPM 7 and those visits are related to a sense of paranoia that I think pervades certainly the national security establishment as a result of some of the high-profile acts of violence that we've seen, the attempted assassination of President Trump when he was on the campaign trail, the murder of Charlie Kirk, murder of the CEO of United Healthcare, which has created, when I talk to people from these agencies, a sense of that there's an, uprising against the kind of political elite.
While the average American who takes issue with the greed of big corporations, the overreach of big government, and sky-high health insurance rates isn't about to commit an act of political violence, they're being targeted by the same powers used to target lunatic assassins.
It's unusually open about what they're targeting. And on the list are things like anti-Christian sentiment, anti-traditional family sentiment, anti-Americanism.
What about anti-capitalism? Is that on the list?
Yes, anti-capitalism is also on the list.
Anti-tech sentiment has also showed up in federal law enforcement documents as a focal point of surveillance. Ken told me that these extremely broad and vague categories aren't just talking points, but massive dragnets to swoop up all kinds of speech and dissent.
So this is telling the Justice Department, the FBI, the DEA, the Secret Service, all these agencies, hey guys, we have to focus on this. And what we're focused on is that list of so-called indicators that I was describing before that are supposed to tell you, or the administration says is supposed to tell you, what will portend future acts of terrorism. This is something on which people are being promoted, resources are being allocated at the field office level in all 52 FBI field offices across the country.
NSPM-7 is a public record, but confidential documents Ken obtained show how it's been interpreted by intelligence agencies to become a guiding force in intelligence collection.
Yeah, so I was leaked a copy of the Department of Homeland Security's strategy, and it had a new term, class-based or economic grievances. They're worried about terrorism as defined by class-based or economic grievances. And typically, when you have a counter-terror approach, that's supposed to be focused on groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS. So this is something that you don't want to be deploying against US residents or US citizens. And it's defined around, again, these terms that would define probably most of the people I know. I mean, who is happy with the economic state of affairs? Probably relatively few people, probably a minority.
The vast expansion of authorities has terrifying implications, according to Ken.
So under this counterterrorism approach, they have a lot more authority than police normally have, because they don't have to go to a judge. And they can just say, oh, these indicators predict that something might be committed later.
After the rollout of NSPM-7, I got curious about how the new powers were playing out at the local level across the country. I began contacting sources in towns big and small, trying to extract records from federal intelligence agencies. A few months ago, I finally got my hands on records that show NSPM-7 investigations are already taking place in FBI field offices from Boston to San Francisco. The Bureau even made this handy map, which was not supposed to leak to the public. I also discovered that briefings, intelligence reports, and investigative notes are being circulated in over 70 government buildings across the country, ominously called fusion centers. These dystopian centers serve as a two-way street between local and state law enforcement and federal agencies like the Department of Homeland Security and FBI. By fusing state and federal intelligence, these centers give federal surveillance agencies far greater power to shape how local and state police think about domestic threats, like normal people pissed off about the price of groceries and health insurance.
These are like local law enforcement entities that was essentially warning all the other CEOs, oh, there's some campaign against CEOs, we need to worry about the threat posed by this.
In the wake of the killing of United Health CEO Brian Thompson by alleged killer Luigi Mangione, a state fusion center analyst warned in a document I obtained that, quote, the public may view the ensuing manhunt and subsequent arrest of Mangione as NYPD, and largely policing as a whole, as a tool that is willing to expend massive resources to protect the wealthy, while the average citizen is left to their own means for personal security. This report seemed to even acknowledge that viewing CEOs as the main demographic to protect would only further enrage working people. Quote, it is not an unfair comparison to equate the current reaction towards Mangione to the reactions to Robin Hood. Citizens may see Mangione's alleged actions as an attack against a system designed to work against them. As I wrapped up my time with Ken, we reflected on the fact that his home state is also where Joseph McCarthy launched the Red Scare over half a century ago. This is also the home state of one Senator Joseph McCarthy, the guy who really created nationwide frenzy around left-wing movements, infiltrating labor unions, scaring the bejesus out of anyone that seemed un-American. Very similar in some sense to the architecture laid out by NSPM-7, no?
Yeah, and it's interesting because Wisconsin historically was one of the test beds for the New Deal and for progressive legislation. And it's interesting because you have in these two tendencies, the two different visions that exist for the society. One of paranoia and security and control and just worrying about threats everywhere. And another one being building some kind of a, social fabric.
We have a long history in this country of these sorts of agencies targeting the Black Civil Rights Movement, targeting the Multiracial Poor People's Campaign, targeting Occupy Wall Street. This is the latest iteration in that.
That was Spencer Reynolds. He understands the internal apparatus of intelligence agencies because he used to work at one.
I was at the Department of Homeland Security for about 7 years, where I was a domestic intelligence and counterterrorism attorney.
Spencer told me that corporations and Wall Street firms get a direct line to the spy agencies seeking to batter down dissent. In other words, CEOs literally have their own seat at the deep state's table.
DHS, the FBI, Department of Justice are deeply enmeshed with big business and corporate security offices. And they do that in a few key ways. First, they all sit together at those fusion centers where information is swirling back and forth. And in that environment, they can provide intelligence to security offices at businesses that will then use it for their own business interests. They can also collect what they might call tips and leads from corporate partners who give them people to look into, or incidents or events and protests, for instance, to look into. So that's one thing.
It turns out, though, that in addition to actually sending liaisons to fusion centers, the Department of Homeland Security also has a two-way newsletter between businesses and intelligence analysts.
DHS has platforms like the Homeland Security Information Network. The information that's provided on there can often include information about protests, constitutionally protected speech and activity.
But that's not all. There are also entire conferences dedicated to corporations snitching on consumers to the deep state.
One of those is the Domestic Security Alliance Council, which is a consortium of business members, and it promises on its website a direct line to DHS and the FBI.
The result of all these systems is a vast intelligence apparatus, trained on people standing up to billionaires.
During Occupy Wall Street, after the banking industry had gutted the world's economy and plunged us into recession, there were again organic uprisings of people who were concerned, upset about that, felt alienated and left out by our economic system. And DHS spent a lot of time monitoring those protesters, the intelligence offices.
To showcase what corporations working hand in hand with the government looks like, let's go back to 2015, when workers at Walmart, the largest retailer in the world, launched a campaign for living wages and benefits. Internal Walmart documents obtained by Bloomberg showed that after the mega retailer hired a Lockheed Martin contractor to monitor union activists and protesters, the internal tracking and monitoring wasn't enough. They also contacted one of the FBI's joint terrorism task forces when union activists planned to protest the annual shareholder meeting. But while the FBI is one of the most well-known offenders when it comes to violating constitutional rights, a different agency, one that was created for the very purpose of protecting workers, is now going after them. The Department of Labor doesn't have an official intelligence component, but its Office of the Inspector General holds powerful investigative capabilities and liaisons with the FBI and other intelligence agencies, including DHS. It has also shown up on the Department of Homeland Security's joint task forces across the country. DOL's top cop is literally a former cop, Inspector General Anthony D'Esposito, who previously served as an NYPD officer, and he was accused of stealing a golden chain from an arrestee and then lying to put a different guy in jail. The NYPD later paid out a six-figure settlement to that guy. But even more concerning than D'Esposito is the top DOL lawyer, Jonathan Berry, the Solicitor General. While working as a corporate lawyer, Berry penned the chapter on the Department of Labor in the policy manual developed by the Anti-Worker Heritage Foundation, known as Project 2025. In the chapter, Berry calls for the transformation of the Department of Labor from a watchdog to ensure workers are protected from predatory corporations, to an investigative arm targeting workers and unions. The chapter calls for using the Office of the Inspector General to look into worker centers across the country. But it also calls for investigating unions without any initiating complaint, meaning investigations into workers and their unions could be undertaken without probable cause, at any time and at any location across the country. While Jonathan Berry's playbook takes shape, Spencer told me there's another element from the Department of Labor already in play.
We talked about these Homeland Security task forces, and the Department of Labor, through its Office of Inspector General, participates in those task forces. When you look at the press releases touting DOJ successes, they often include Department of Labor there, and it's usually through the Office of Inspector General. It's concerning because I think there is that risk to investigate workers.
In other words, the Department of Labor has found a way to inject itself into the dirty business of intelligence work. So where does this leave you, the American worker? Well, believe it or not, there's a vast range of tools to fight back against government surveillance. Cities across the country have used their city council to terminate partnerships with the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Forces, carrying out NSPM 7. Unions like the American Federation of Teachers and United Auto Workers are suing the government to shut down unconstitutional surveillance. And And whether in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where local residents drove agencies like ICE and CBP out of their communities, or in the nationwide upheaval to force the FBI to release its files on Jeffrey Epstein, the demands of the public continue to have a massive impact on the federal government's actions. The three-letter agencies, whether DHS, FBI, or CIA, would have the American public believe that their war on working people is already won. But that lie couldn't be further from the truth. Thanks for watching. If you want to support our work, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. If you have a story idea, you can send it to stories@perfectunion.us. If you work for a federal law enforcement or intelligence agency, you can reach me at daniel.boguslaw@proton.me. And you can check out those documents and more of my reporting at Deeper States on Substack.